Axiom Prime shook like a living thing as the pallid compact fleet moved into attack formation. Marcus could feel the vibrations through the soles of his shoes. As he ran through the corridors of the station, alarms screaming overhead, and alien diplomats rushing past him in every direction. Some were heading for escape pods. Some were heading for their ships. Everyone was afraid, and the fear had a smell to it. Sharp and electric and universal, regardless of species. Corveth was beside him, all four arms ready, his carapace patterns burning a deep combat red. "We must get you to the Fiddler's Green, Ambassador. The Queen has ordered your evacuation. Where is Thyravex? Preparing for war. The compact fleet outnumbers our escort 3-1. She will fight and she will likely die, but she will not yield." Marcus stopped running. He just stopped right there, in the middle of a corridor full of panicking aliens, with the station shaking around him, blaring, and the very real possibility that everyone on this station was about to die. Corveth turned back. "Ambassador, we must go." "No. Marcus, this is not the time for—" "I said no." Marcus looked up at the towering warrior scholar, and his face was pale and scared and absolutely certain. "I am the ambassador. This is what ambassadors do. They stay." Corveth stared at him for a long moment, and then his patterns shifted from combat red to something Marcus had never seen before, a deep, steady gold that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Then I stay with you," Corveth said. They found Thyravex in the station's central command hub, surrounded by holographic tactical displays and Vrethkai officers. She was magnificent in her fury, her patterns blazing white-hot as she directed her fleet with the calm precision of a queen who had been born for battle. She saw Marcus, and something flickered across her alien face. "I did not summon you here, Ambassador. I ordered your evacuation," Marcus said. "I am not going. You have done enough. You have proven your species' worth. The tribunal heard you. The galaxy heard you. Your duty is fulfilled. My duty is not fulfilled because people are still in danger." Marcus stepped forward, and for a moment the logistics coordinator from Milwaukee and the Queen of 900 star systems stood eye to eye. "You told me that power is given, not taken. You told me that recognition is sacred, that a vassal chooses their queen. Well, I chose you, boss. I chose this, and I am not leaving." Thyravex was still for a heartbeat, then her pattern softened just slightly. "What would you have me do?" "Give me an open broadcast. Every ship, every species, every frequency." "You wish to speak to the compact?" "I wish to speak to everyone." Thyravex studied him with those galaxy-dark eyes, and then she nodded. One of her four hands touched a command panel, and the holographic displays around them shifted. The entire communication array of Axiom Prime opened up like a flower, and Marcus Cole's voice was suddenly connected to every vessel, every station, every receiver within range. He stood in the middle of the command hub, with the Queen of the Vrethkai Concord behind him, and his friend Corveth beside him, and the weight of his entire species on his shoulders. And he spoke. He did not give a speech. He did not have one prepared. He just talked. "My name is Marcus Cole," he said. "I am a human being from a planet called Earth, and 3 weeks ago I had never met an alien in my life. I am not a soldier. I am not a politician. I am a logistics coordinator, which means I used to move boxes from one place to another for a living. I am here because I called an alien queen boss by accident, and somehow that turned into a job." He took a breath, and the galaxy listened. "I know most of you have never heard of my species. We are new here. We are small. We live on one little planet that we have barely figured out how to take care of. We fight each other constantly. We are stubborn and irrational, and we are afraid of the dark." He paused. "But I want to tell you something about humans. When a human sees someone in trouble, even a stranger, even an enemy, Something in us refuses to look away. I do not know where it comes from. I do not know if it is smart or stupid, but it is there. It is in every single one of us. This stubborn, ridiculous refusal to just walk away when someone needs help. His voice was shaking, but he did not stop. I have been on this station for a short time, and I have met beings I never imagined could exist. I sat with two species who had been at war for 300 years, and I watched them remember that they were family. I stood in a throne room above a star, and I watched a queen fight for people who were not even her own kind. I saw a soldier pull a child from rubble and hold her like she was the most precious thing in the universe. He looked at the tactical display where the compact fleet glowed red and angry. And now someone wants to burn all of that down. Not because they have to, but because they can. Because they believe that power means making others afraid. Marcus turned his words toward the compact fleet directly. You want to know what humanity brings to the galaxy? We bring the crazy idea that you do not have to earn the right to exist. You just do. Every species on this station, every being on every ship out there, you exist, and that is enough. You do not need to be strong enough, or useful enough, or old enough to deserve to live. His voice hardened just slightly. And if you come for these people, you come for us. And I promise you, we are way too stubborn to make that easy. He stopped talking. The silence that followed stretched across the void between ships, across the vast, cold distances between stars, across every frequency and every receiver and every translator. And then something extraordinary happened. A small ship, a trading vessel from a species Marcus did not recognize, broke from the cluster of neutral vessels around the station. It moved forward, positioning itself between Axiom Prime and the compact fleet. Not attacking, not fleeing, just placing itself in the way. Then another ship joined it. Another. The two reconciled species, the Korath and the Villani, broadcast a joint message for the first time in 3 centuries. Their combined fleet, which was not large but was fierce, moved into defensive formation around the station. A hive-mind collective that had not spoken in the tribunal in over 100 years activated its communication array and broadcast a single word that every translator rendered the same way. Stay. Within 30 minutes, what had been a scattered collection of neutral observers became a fleet. And not a Vrethkai fleet. This was something new. A coalition of dozens of species who had never cooperated before, who disagreed about almost everything, who had no reason to risk their lives except that a frightened human had stood up and told them that existing was enough. The compact fleet was outnumbered, not by the Vrethkai military might they had calculated for, but by everyone else, by the very species they had dismissed as irrelevant. Irrelevant. Marcus watched the tactical display as more and more ships repositioned, and he felt tears running down his face that he did not bother to wipe away. On the compact's flagship, Solvan stood before his own tactical displays and watched his 3-to-1 advantage evaporate. He was many things, cruel and calculating and cold, but he was not stupid. He recognized a losing position, and he recognized something else too. Something that his centuries of political experience had not prepared him for. He had not lost to the Vrethkai. He had not lost to military force. He had lost to a logistics coordinator who had asked the galaxy to be decent, and the galaxy had said yes. The compact fleet powered down its weapons. One by one, the red indicators on the tactical display shifted to neutral gray. The warships turned and began to withdraw, pulling away from Axiom Prime like a tide going out. No shots were fired. In the command hub, Marcus let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 3 weeks, and his knees buckled. Korveth caught him with 2 arms and held him steady, and Marcus leaned against his friend's armored chest and laughed a sound that was half joy and half disbelief, and entirely human. Thyravex stood before the Galactic Tribunal 1 hour later. The chamber was full to bursting, every platform occupied, every species present, and the atmosphere was electric with something that felt like the beginning of a new era. The Queen's patterns blazed with a light that filled the room as she spoke. I present to this tribunal Marcus Cole, Ambassador of Humanity. I ask that his species be recognized as full members of the galactic community, with all rights, protections, and responsibilities that recognition entails. The vote was near unanimous. Marcus stood on his platform one last time and looked up at the hundreds of faces staring down at him, and he thought about that letter the soldier had written, and fear, and the stubborn human refusal to give up, even when everything was falling apart. He thought about Earth. Later that evening he stood on the observation deck of Axiom Prime, watching the stars. The gas giant they had stumbled upon seemed like a lifetime ago. The cargo hauler with its broken FTL drive seemed like a dream. Everything seemed like a dream, except that it was not. Corvette stood beside him as he always did. "Do you think I'm ever going to get used to this?" Marcus asked. Corvette, who had grown fond of this strange, small, endlessly surprising human, in a way that crossed every boundary of species and culture and biology, let his pattern shift to a warm and gentle gold. "No," he said, "and that is precisely why you are good at it." Marcus nodded. Somewhere out there in the dark between the stars was Earth, home. 8 billion people who had no idea what had happened, who did not yet know that they were part of something vast and ancient. Beautiful. He would have to tell them. He would have to explain that their galactic ambassador was a cargo logistics guy who got the job because he called everyone boss. He would have to tell them that the universe had looked at humanity, with all its flaws and all its stubbornness and all its ridiculous irrational courage, and decided that it was enough. He took a breath. "All right," he muttered to himself, "let us get to work." And somewhere across the stars, in a throne room above a burning sun, a queen's patterns flickered with quiet pride for the small, brave species that had stumbled into her world and changed it forever. Not with weapons, not with power, but with the simple, stubborn human refusal to leave when someone needed help. The Galactic Tribunal Chamber was the largest enclosed space Marcus had ever seen, and he had spent his career inside cargo bays. It was shaped like a vast bowl, carved from pale stone that seemed to glow from within, with hundreds of tiered platforms rising up on all sides, each one occupied by delegations from different species. The air hummed with 1,000 translation devices, all working at once, creating a constant soft murmur that sounded like the universe itself was whispering. At the center of the bowl, a single raised platform stood under a beam of white light, and that was where Marcus would have to stand. He felt like a man walking to the gallows in a suit that did not fit. The Pallid Compact's chief diplomat was already in his place on the opposing platform, and Marcus hated him on sight, which was not very diplomatic, but was extremely honest. Solvan of the Tyrish was tall and elegant in the way that a blade is elegant. He was reptilian, with smooth, pale scales that shifted between silver and white, depending on the light. His eyes were narrow and golden, and they held the kind of intelligence that did not just think 3 moves ahead, but had already won the game before sitting down at the table. He wore robes of deep crimson that flowed like blood, and when he looked at Marcus, his thin mouth curved into a smile that contained absolutely no warmth whatsoever. "So this is the human," Solvan said, and his translated voice was smooth and cold. "I expected something more impressive." "I get that a lot," Marcus said. The tribunal elder, an ancient being of a species Marcus could not identify, who appeared to be made primarily of slow-moving light, called the proceedings to order. The trial would have 3 phases: proof of sentience to determine if humanity could reason and create, proof of sovereignty to determine if humanity governed itself meaningfully, and proof of worth to determine if humanity contributed something unique to them. Galactic Community, Failure in any phase would result in humanity being classified as non-sentient and stripped of all protections. Marcus looked up at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him, and thought about every single human being on Earth who had no idea this was happening. Phase 1 began. Solvan was brilliant and ruthless. He presented a carefully curated history of humanity that focused entirely on the worst parts. Wars that killed millions, environmental destruction on a planetary scale, weapons designed to cause maximum suffering, cruelty and exploitation and stupidity on a scale that made the tribunal murmur with unease. This species has spent its entire existence finding more efficient ways to destroy itself and everything around it, Solvan said with elegant contempt. Sophisticated predators perhaps, but sentient beings worthy of galactic recognition? The evidence speaks against it. Marcus stood on his platform and felt the weight of every terrible thing humanity had ever done pressing down on him. Solvan was not lying. Those things had happened. Those things were real. But they were not the whole truth. When his turn came, Marcus did not deliver a grand speech. He pulled up a holographic display and played a recording of a symphony. He let the music fill the enormous chamber, every note rising and falling through the alien air, and he watched faces he could not read go still with something he hoped was wonder. Then he showed them a photograph, the pale blue dot, a tiny speck of light in a vast beam of sunlight, taken from the edge of their solar system. That is Earth, he said. That is where all of us live. Every human who ever loved someone or wrote a song or told a joke or held their child at night lives on that little dot. Then he read from a letter. A soldier had written it during one of those terrible wars Solvan had described. A letter home to his wife, full of fear and loneliness and love so fierce it burned through the words like fire. Marcus read it slowly and carefully, and did not try to make it dramatic because it did not need drama. It just needed to be heard. A creature that can destroy everything it loves and still choose to write poetry about it is not an animal, Marcus said. It is something that hurts in ways your translator cannot render. And a species that can look at its own cruelty and weep for it is not without sentience. It is drowning in it. The chamber was silent for a long time. Phase 1 passed. Phase 2 was harder. Solvan argued that humanity had no unified government, and therefore no true sovereignty. How could a species that could not agree on a single leader claim to govern itself? How could a fractured, squabbling collection of nations be considered a civilization rather than a very large argument? A moment, and then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He talked about supply chains. I am a logistics coordinator, he said. That is what I did before all of this. I moved things from where they were to where they needed to be. And I can tell you that the most impressive thing about humanity is not any single government or leader. It is the fact that every single day billions of humans who disagree about almost everything still manage to feed each other. He pulled up data. Global shipping routes, communication networks, international treaties, emergency response systems. The invisible web of cooperation that kept 8 billion people alive on a single planet. We do not have one ruler, Marcus said. We have something harder. We have a species that argues constantly and cooperates anyway. We self-organize at every level, from a family sharing dinner to nations sharing resources after disasters. We are not an empire. We are an ecosystem. And I would argue that an ecosystem that sustains itself through constant negotiation and adaptation is a more impressive form of sovereignty than any throne. Several delegations in the tribunal stirred with interest. Marcus noticed that the hive mind species and collective consciousness races were paying very close attention. Some of them had never considered that distributed governance could be a form of strength rather than a weakness. Phase 2 passed by a narrow margin. Solvan showed no emotion, but Marcus caught the faintest tightening around his golden eyes. Phase 3. This was where the trap was waiting. Solvayon invoked an ancient rite called the Demonstration of Worth, which allowed the challenger to set a specific test. The tribunal elder confirmed it was legal, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. The test was this. Marcus would be given 12 hours to negotiate a resolution to an actual ongoing dispute between two species present at the tribunal. Humanity had worth. If he failed, humanity was worthless. The dispute Solvayon chose was a nightmare. Two species, the Korath and the Vallani, had been fighting a war over a single planet for 300 years. The conflict had claimed millions of lives, and every attempt at mediation had failed. The planet was sacred to both sides, and neither would yield. It was deliberately chosen to be impossible. Marcus looked at Solvayon and saw the satisfaction in those golden eyes. The Tyrish diplomat had set a test that no one could pass. 12 hours, the tribunal elder announced. The chamber will reconvene at the next cycle. Marcus walked back to his quarters on legs that felt like they were made of water. Corveth walked beside him in concerned silence. Dr. Lena Okafor was waiting for him, and she took one look at his face and handed him a cup of something warm, without saying a word. "I need to talk to them," Marcus said after a long while. "Both sides, I need to talk to." "That is unusual," Corveth said. "Most diplomats begin by studying the legal history of the dispute." "I am not a diplomat," Marcus said. "I am a guy who reads people, and I cannot read anyone from a legal document." He went to the Korath delegation first. They were stocky, powerful beings with stone-gray skin and deep voices that rumbled like distant thunder. They did not want to talk to him. They thought he was a waste of time. But Marcus sat with them and did not argue or propose anything. He just asked questions and listened. Then he went to the Vallani. They were taller and thinner, with skin like dark water and voices that chimed like bells. They were equally hostile, and equally certain that their claim was the only righteous one. And again, Marcus sat and listened. He listened for 10 hours. He listened until his back ached and his eyes burned, and his translator gave him a headache that felt like someone was driving a nail through this temple. Somewhere around hour 9, he heard something that made him go very still. Both species told the same story. Different words, different names, different details, but the same story. A homeworld lost long ago. A people divided. A sacred place that called to them across the centuries. They were not two species fighting over territory. They were one species that had diverged millennia ago. And the planet they were killing each other over was the place they had both come from. They were fighting over who got to go home. In the tribunal chamber with hundreds of species watching, and Solvayon's golden eyes fixed on him like a predator waiting for the kill, Marcus did not present a legal argument. He told them what he had found. He spoke gently and simply, the way you speak to someone who is in pain and does not know why. He told the Korath and the Vallani that their myths matched, that their sacred songs shared melodies, that the planet they were dying for was not a prize to be won, but a cradle they had both been born in. "You are not enemies," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire chamber. "You are family that forgot, and I think you both know that, because you have been fighting over who gets to go home, and only family fights that hard about home." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Marcus had ever heard. Then the elder of the Korath delegation rose from her seat. She was old and scarred, and she had been fighting this war for most of her life. She crossed the chamber floor slowly, each step heavy with 300 years of grief. And she stopped in front of the Vallani elder. The Vallani elder looked up at her with eyes that shimmered like dark water. The Korath elder opened her stone-gray arms, and the Vallani elder stepped into them. The tribunal erupted. Every delegation was on its feet. The sound was deafening, a roar of voices and chimes and rumbles and sounds Marcus had no name for, all blending together into something that felt like hope. Even Solvan was silent. His golden eyes were wide, and for the first time his elegant composure had cracked. Phase 3 passed overwhelmingly. Marcus stood on his platform, shaking with exhaustion, and something that felt dangerously close to tears. And he thought about that little blue dot, and all the stubborn, impossible people living on it. Then Solvan moved. The Tyrish diplomat stepped forward, and his voice cut through the celebration like a blade of ice. A touching performance, but ultimately irrelevant. The chamber went quiet. The Compact does not recognize this tribunal's authority over matters of galactic security, Solvan said. His mask was back in place, smooth and cold and absolute. Humanity's classification is a political convenience, and politics are decided by power, not by sentiment. He touched a device on his wrist, and the chamber's holographic displays lit up with tactical data. Outside Axiom Prime, the pallid compact warships were powering up their weapons. Solvan turned to Marcus, and his golden eyes burned with cold fury. You may have proven your species can talk. Now let us see if it can survive. The alarms began to scream. The journey to Axiom Prime would take 11 standard days, and Marcus spent every single one of them learning how to not accidentally destroy humanity's reputation. Corveth was a patient teacher, which was fortunate, because Marcus was a terrible student in the traditional sense. He could not memorize the 11,000 forms of formal address used across galactic civilizations. He could not keep straight which species considered eye contact an honor, and which considered it a death threat. He mixed up the Tyrish hegemony with the Tyrish collective twice, and Corveth gently informed him that the collective had been extinct for 300 years, and referencing them was the equivalent of congratulating someone on their deceased relative. I am going to get us all killed, Marcus said on the third day, slumped over a crystal table covered in holographic notes. Perhaps, Corveth agreed, but you will do so with remarkable sincerity, and that counts for something, among many. What Corveth noticed, however, and what he reported to the Queen in his private briefings, was something that no amount of formal training could have produced. Marcus Cole could read people. Not in a mystical or supernatural sense, but in the way that a man who had spent 15 years managing supply chains and impossible deadlines and angry dock workers and overworked engineers had learned to read people. He could walk into a room and within 5 minutes tell you who was in charge, who was pretending to be in charge, who was angry, who was scared, and who was about to do something stupid. He cut through ceremony and politeness and went straight to what beings actually wanted and feared. It was not diplomacy, it was survival instinct sharpened by years of navigating human nonsense, and it translated remarkably well to alien nonsense. On the 5th night, the first assassination attempt came. Marcus should have been asleep in his quarters, but he was an insomniac, and always had been. Back on Earth, he would wander the corridors of whatever station or ship he was posted on, at 3 in the morning, looking for vending machines or someone to talk to. On the Vrethkai flagship, he did the same thing, padding through the crystalline hallways in his socks, because the floor was warm and his boots gave him blisters. He was 2 corridors away from his room when he heard the alarm. The assassins had pumped a colorless toxin into his quarters through the ventilation system, something designed to mimic a ship malfunction, so it would look like an accident. The gas would have killed him in his sleep within minutes. If he had been in his bed, he would have died without ever waking up. Instead, he was standing in the hallway, holding a cup of something that tasted like warm honey mixed with cinnamon, that he had found in what he was fairly sure was the Vrethkai equivalent of a break room. Corveth found him there, surrounded by rushing soldiers, flashing alarms, looking mildly confused. What happened? Marcus asked. Someone tried to kill you. Ah, Marcus sipped his drink. That is starting to feel like a theme. Corvette stared at him with an expression that Marcus would later learn was the Vrethkai face for complete bewilderment. You survived because you could not sleep and went looking for a snack. I survive most things because of snacks, Marcus said. You would be amazed how often that works. The crew of the Fiddler's Green was allowed to accompany Marcus on the journey, and he was grateful for that in ways he could not easily express. They were his people in the simplest and most important sense of the word. Captain Sato had recovered from her initial shock, and thrown herself into learning everything she could about the political situation. Chief Engineer Reeves had somehow befriended 3 Vrethkai mechanics, and was learning how their crystal-based technology worked. Okafor, who kept Marcus sane. Lena was the ship's medic, a calm and steady woman from Lagos, who had a gift for saying exactly what someone needed to hear at exactly the right time. She found Marcus on the observation deck on the 7th night, staring out at the stars, with the look of a man who was carrying something too heavy. "You are overthinking this," she said, sitting down beside him. "I am underthinking this," Marcus replied. "I do not know what I am doing, Lena. They want me to stand in front of a galactic court and represent all of humanity, and I cannot even remember which fork to use at dinner." "There are 7 forks," Lena said. "It is an unreasonable number of forks. Nobody should be judged by forks." Marcus almost smiled. "What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing and they decide humans are not worth protecting? What if Earth pays the price because a cargo guy from Milwaukee could not keep his mouth shut?" Lena looked at him steadily. "Do not have to be the smartest person in the room, Marcus. You just have to be the most honest, and you are the most honest person I know. You are honest to the point of being annoying sometimes. Thank you, I think." "You are welcome. Now stop sulking and go to sleep. You have alien politics in the morning." On the 8th day, the convoy stopped at a Vrethkai border world to resupply, and Marcus saw something that changed everything. The planet's surface was scarred. Black marks stretched across green fields where orbital strikes had burned the land. A settlement of small dome-shaped buildings lay half in ruins, and among the rubble, Vrethkai soldiers moved carefully, pulling survivors from collapsed structures. The survivors were not Vrethkai. They were small, soft-bodied creatures with wide, frightened eyes and trembling hands, barely 3 feet tall, and clearly built for a gentle world that had just been torn apart. "Pallid compact raid," Corvette said. He sighed Marcus as they watched from a landing platform. "This species is called the Melvari. They joined the Concord 200 years ago because they could not defend themselves. The compact struck this colony to send a message." Marcus watched a Vrethkai soldier, 8 feet of armored warrior, kneel down in the rubble and lift a tiny Melvari child into her massive arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so large. The child clung to the soldier's neck, and the soldier's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a soft, warm blue. "They chose to join," Marcus said. "The Melvari. Nobody forced them." "No one is forced," Corvette said. "That is the foundation of the Concord. Power is given, not taken. You know this. You spoke it yourself when you recognized the Queen." Marcus watched the rescue efforts for a long time. After that, he stopped treating his ambassadorship as an accident and started treating it as a responsibility. The second assassination attempt came on the 9th day. A shape-shifting agent of the Pallid Compact had infiltrated the ship, disguised as one of the Vrethkai servants who attended Marcus's quarters. The disguise was nearly perfect. The right height, the right coloring, the right patterns. The agent had been in place for 2 days, waiting for the right moment. Marcus caught it, not through cleverness or training, but through something far more human. The real Vrethkai attendant, who normally brought his meals, was named Selvari. And Selvari always laughed at Marcus's terrible jokes, not because they were funny, but because Selvari found the human concept of humor fascinating and delightful. The fake Selvari brought his meal on the 9th morning, and Marcus made the same bad joke he always made about the food looking like it was still alive. And the fake Selvari did not laugh, just stood there with a tray and a perfect Rethkai face, and no warmth behind the eyes at all. Marcus felt the wrongness in his gut before his brain caught up. "You are not Selvari," he said, and then he was diving sideways, as a blade made of condensed light slashed through the space where his neck had been. He hit the floor rolling and screaming for Corveth, which was not dignified, but was extremely effective. The warrior scholar came through the door like a thunderbolt, and the fight that followed was brief and violent, and ended with the assassin pinned to the crystal floor under 4 powerful arms. Later, when his hands had stopped shaking, Marcus sat with Corveth and stared at the ceiling. "I caught that one because it did not laugh at my jokes," he said. "Yes," Corveth said, "that is the most human reason anyone has ever survived an assassination attempt." "I am beginning to understand," Corveth said, with something very close to fondness in his voice, "that everything about your species is like this." Queen Thyravex summoned Marcus that evening. She had been observing him from a distance the entire journey, and now she looked at him with those galaxy-dark eyes, and spoke with a warmth he had not heard from her before. "Your species lies to itself constantly," she said. "You told yourself you were not qualified. You told yourself you were afraid. You told yourself you were not the right person. And yet you noticed what trained Rethkai security did not. You survived what should have killed you. You walked through the ruins of a bombed colony, and I watched your heart break and rebuild itself in the same hour." She leaned forward. "Do you know what makes humanity extraordinary, Marcus Cole? Our inability to sleep properly. Your species wraps its courage in self-deprecation. You call yourself small while doing enormous things. I have encountered 4,000 civilizations, and I have never seen anything like it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Why did you really choose me?" Thyravex's patterns blazed with something ancient. "Because when you stood before a being who could have destroyed your entire crew with a thought, you did not beg, you did not threaten, and you did not posture. You called me boss and told me to calm down. Only a species with no concept of its own insignificance could do that. That is not ignorance, Ambassador. That is power." Marcus had no answer for that. The next morning, they arrived at Axiom Prime. The station was a megastructure the size of a small moon, bristling with docking spires and communication arrays, and the ships of 100 civilizations. Warships orbited it in careful formations, their weapons cold but ready. Among them, the pallid compact flagship sat like a predator, watching from the tall grass. Corveth stood beside Marcus at the viewport. "The compact's chief diplomat has filed a motion with the tribunal. They wish to have humanity declared a non-sentient subservient species." "Which means what exactly?" "It means they will argue that you cannot serve as ambassador because humans are merely clever animals. If the motion passes, your species receives no protections under galactic law." Corveth's patterns darkened. It would mean open season on Earth. Marcus looked at the station growing larger in the viewport, and felt the weight of 8 billion lives settle onto his shoulders like a coat he could never take off. "Then I guess," he said slowly, "I had better not lose." They separated Marcus from the crew within the hour. He tried to argue about it, but arguing with 8-foot-tall aliens who had just knelt before him was a strange experience, because they did not argue back. They simply bowed and guided him forward with a politeness so absolute that it felt like being kidnapped by butlers. The quarters they gave him were insane. The room was made of living crystal that shifted and reshaped itself around him. When he thought about sitting down, a chair grew out of the floor. When he felt cold, the walls pulsed with gentle warmth. When he muttered that he could really use a drink, a small basin filled with clear water rose from a pedestal near the window. It tasted like the cleanest water he had ever had in his life, and it made him deeply suspicious. A Vrethkai entered without knocking, which Marcus would learn was normal, because knocking implied you doubted your welcome. This one was slightly shorter than the queen, but still towered over Marcus, with a deep blue carapace and calm, steady eyes. His bioluminescent patterns moved in slow, thoughtful waves, like a man choosing his words carefully. "I am Corveth," the alien said through his translation device, "warrior scholar of the Third Reach. I have been assigned as your attaché." "My what now?" "Your guide, your protector, your teacher." Corveth paused. "Your keeper, if the need arises." "Fantastic," Marcus said. "So you are basically my babysitter." Corveth tilted his enormous head. "I do not know this word, but I suspect you are correct." Marcus sat down on his crystal chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "Okay, Corveth, I need you to explain to me very slowly and in very small words what happened back there, because my captain looks like she saw a ghost, and your soldiers kneeled on the floor, and your queen touched my shoulder like I had just proposed marriage." Corveth settled himself on the floor, folding his forearms neatly. Patterns shifted to a soft, instructive amber. "You called her ascendancy Thyravex by the word your device translated as boss." "Yeah, I call everyone boss. It does not mean anything." "It means everything," Corveth said quietly. "Your translation device does not merely convert words. It reads the intent behind them, the meaning you carry in your heart when you speak. The word it found in our language for what you meant was Vrethsoul. And that is bad? That is sacred." Corveth's patterns brightened. Vrethsoul is the word a bonded vassal speaks only to their chosen queen. It means supreme authority. I willingly serve. It is not a title that can be demanded or forced. It can only be given freely by someone who recognizes true greatness in another. In our culture, this act of willing recognition is more sacred than a coronation. It is the foundation upon which all Vrethkai power is built. Marcus stared at him. I was trying to tell her to calm down. You acknowledged her authority with a sincerity that our translators confirmed was genuine. You were not afraid. You were not submissive. You simply recognized her as the one in charge and deferred to her naturally and without hesitation. No species outside the Vrethkai has ever done this. In 4,000 years of contact with alien civilizations, you are the first, because it was an accident. Corveth made a sound that Marcus would later learn was the Vrethkai equivalent of a gentle laugh. The universe does not make accidents, Ambassador. It makes choices through unwilling hands. Do not call me Ambassador. I must, Corveth said, because that is what you are about to become. Before Marcus could object to this in the several loud ways he was planning, a summons arrived in the form of a crystalline chime that resonated through the walls of his quarters. Her Ascendancy, Thyravex, wished to see him. The throne hall of the Vrethkai flagship was a cathedral. Marcus had seen big rooms before. He had worked in cargo bays that could hold small buildings. But this was something else entirely. The chamber was enormous, with floating platforms of crystal suspended above a transparent floor, through which he could see an actual star burning far below. Its light filtered to a warm amber glow that made everything look like it existed inside a sunset. Thyravex sat on a throne that appeared to have grown from the ship itself, a twisting spire of dark crystal that cradled her massive form like a hand. She was even more imposing here than she had been in the corridor of the Fiddler's Green. Her crown of horns caught the starlight and scattered it into tiny rainbows across the ceiling. Her liquid gold mantle flowed around her shoulders like something alive. Marcus walked across the transparent floor, trying very hard not to look down at the star beneath his feet, and stopped at what he hoped was an appropriate distance. "Wanted to see me, boss," he said, and then immediately winced. "Sorry, force of habit." Thyravex's patterns rippled with something warm. "Do not apologize for speaking truth, Marcus Cole. I have been watching your people since we brought you aboard. You are a strange species. You are soft and small, and you break so easily, and yet there is a stubbornness in you that I find remarkable. We get that a lot, Marcus said. The Queen leaned forward and the throne shifted with her. I will be direct with you because I believe your kind prefers this. The Vrethkai Concord spans 900 star systems. We protect over 200 client species who have chosen to live under our guardianship. We are not conquerors, we are keepers. But there are those who see our strength as a threat. She waved one of her hands and the air between them filled with a holographic map of the galaxy, vast and glittering, and marked with territories in different colors, a large swath of red pressed against the borders of Vrethkai space, like a stain. The Pallid Compact, Thyravex said, a coalition of empires that believes the only path to security is the subjugation of all others. They have been tightening their hold on neutral space for decades, and now they prepare for war against us. War that will come within 1 galactic standard year. Marcus looked at the map and felt something cold settle in his stomach. That is a lot of red. It is, Thyravex agreed. But there is an ancient body called the Galactic Tribunal that can intervene if proper legal grounds are established. Your recognition of my authority as an uncontacted species gives me those grounds. If I can present an ambassador from a newly discovered civilization who willingly endorses our concord, it changes everything. It forces the tribunal to hear our case. It buys us time and allies and legitimacy. Marcus saw where this was going, and he did not like it. You want me to be that ambassador. I am a logistics coordinator. I move boxes for a living. And yet when your captain could not speak, and my soldiers were seconds from interpreting her silence as hostility, you stepped forward and spoke words that stopped a war before it started. Thyravex's voice softened, but lost none of its power. Would you prefer I appoint your captain, who could not even speak, or your species leaders who do not yet know we exist? You spoke when no one else could. That is what an ambassador does. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, and found that he could not actually find a flaw in her logic, which annoyed him greatly. I do not know the first thing about galactic politics, he said. You will learn. I will probably say something stupid and start an interstellar incident. You already did, and it worked in our favor. Marcus exhaled slowly and looked down through the transparent floor at the star burning below. A small part of him, the part that had always done what needed doing, even when nobody asked, was already saying yes. Fine, he said, but if this goes wrong, I want it on the record that I told you so. Thyravex's patterns blazed with satisfaction. Noted. Later that evening, Corveth found Marcus sitting in his quarters, staring at nothing. The warrior scholar stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. Ambassador, I must inform you of a security matter. What now? Our sensors have detected 3 pallid compact assassins aboard this vessel. They infiltrated before we departed. They are not here for the Queen. Corveth paused, and his patterns darkened to a deep, concerned indigo. They are here for you. Marcus let out a long, slow breath. I do not even know how to use an alien fork. I will teach you, Corveth said, with absolute seriousness. But first we must ensure you survive the night. Great, Marcus said. This just keeps getting better. Marcus Cole was not the kind of man the universe should have picked for anything important. He was a logistics coordinator on the deep space cargo hauler MSV Fiddler's Green, and his entire job was making sure crates ended up in the right place at the right time. He was good at it. He was not good at much else. He had a bad habit of calling everyone boss, whether they were his captain or the guy who made his coffee. And he had not slept more than 5 hours a night in about 6 years. So when the Fiddler's Green dropped out of hyperspace in the wrong star system, with its engines screaming and half the control panels spitting sparks, Marcus did what he always did. He swore under his breath, grabbed the nearest handhold, and waited for someone more qualified to fix the problem. Captain Yuna Sato was already barking orders from the bridge, her voice sharp and steady, the way it always was when things went sideways. The FTL drive had misfired, and thrown them into uncharted territory. Space. Somewhere near a gas giant with pale green rings that filled the viewport like a painting nobody had asked for. The engines were dead. The backup systems were running on fumes. They were drifting. "How long before we can restart the drive?" Sato asked. "Could be hours, could be never," said Chief Engineer Reeves from somewhere beneath a floor panel. "This thing is fried, Captain." Marcus leaned against the cargo bay wall and stared out the small porthole beside him. The gas giant was beautiful in a terrifying sort of way, the kind of beauty that reminded you how small you were, and how much the universe did not care about your schedule. Then, something moved in front of the rings. At first he thought it was an asteroid, a big one. But asteroids did not glow, and they certainly did not change direction. The thing that slid out from behind the gas giant was enormous, easily several kilometers long, and it was shaped like a crystal that had grown arms, with colors that Marcus did not have names for. And it was heading straight for them. "Captain," he said into his comm, keeping his voice as calm as he could manage, "there is something out here, and it is very, very big." The bridge crew saw it 2 seconds later. The alarms that followed were almost unnecessary, because everyone was already terrified. The crystalline ship moved with a slow and terrible grace, like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. A beam of soft blue light reached out from its belly and wrapped around the Fiddler's Green, and the entire ship shuddered as they were pulled forward. Marcus felt his boots slide on the deck as gravity shifted and twisted. They were being towed into an opening in the crystal vessel's hull, a docking bay so vast that their cargo hauler looked like a toy boat floating into the mouth of a whale. The ship settled onto the alien deck with a gentle thud that Marcus felt in his teeth, shifting from blue to warm gold, and something began moving outside the airlock. Captain Sato gathered the crew in the main corridor. 11 humans standing in a tight cluster, watching the airlock door like it was the gate to hell. Marcus stood near the back, because that was where logistics coordinators belonged. The airlock hissed open. The beings that stepped through were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen or imagined. They stood 8 feet tall at minimum, with bodies that were somewhere between human and insect, covered in hard, iridescent shells that caught the light and threw it back in ripples of color. They had 4 arms each, 2 large and 2 smaller, and their faces were angular and sharp, with wide dark eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies inside them. Patterns of light moved across their bodies like living tattoos, shifting and pulsing in ways that felt almost like language. There were 6 of them, and they carried weapons that looked like they had been grown rather than built. The tallest one stepped forward. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her shell was darker than the others, a deep violet that shimmered with veins of gold, and rising from her head was a crown of spiraling horns that looked like they had been carved from starlight. She wore a mantle across her broad shoulders that seemed to be made of liquid metal, and every pattern on her body blazed brighter than any of the soldiers beside her. She looked at the humans the way a queen looks at unexpected visitors in her throne room, not with anger, not with fear, with a calm and absolute authority that made the air itself feel heavier. Captain Sato stepped forward to speak, and froze. Marcus watched it happen. He saw his captain open her mouth, and nothing came out. Her eyes were wide, her hands were shaking, and every word she had ever learned about first contact protocols had apparently evacuated her brain, without leaving a forwarding address. The silence stretched, and then the alien soldiers shifted their stances. The patterns on their bodies turned from gold to a sharp warning red. Marcus did not need a translator to understand that body language. Something about the silence was wrong. Something about it was making them angry. Corveth, the warrior scholar who would later explain everything to Marcus, would tell him that among the Vreth Kai, silence from a leader was not shyness or caution. It was a declaration of contempt, a refusal to acknowledge the other party's existence. It was, in their culture, one step below spitting on someone's grave. The tall female's eyes narrowed. Her four hands curled slowly into fists. And Marcus, who had no idea about any of this, who was standing at the back of the group watching his captain choke and these enormous aliens turn red, did exactly what Marcus Cole always did when a situation was getting tense and nobody else was handling it. Stepped forward, raised both hands palm out, and said the words that would change the course of galactic history. "Easy there, boss. We come in peace. Nobody here wants trouble." He said it the way he said everything, casual, calm, a little tired, like he was talking to an upset dock foreman rather than an alien queen who commanded 900 star systems. The device on the tall female's wrist pulsed with light as it processed his words, and something happened that Marcus did not expect. Every single Vrethkai soldier dropped to one knee. The sound of their armored bodies hitting the deck echoed through the corridor like thunder. The tall female went completely still, her bioluminescent patterns flaring from red to a blazing white gold that was almost too bright to look at. Her dark galaxy eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that pinned him in place, like a butterfly on a board. Marcus blinked. Was it something I said? The female spoke. Her voice was deep and resonant, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the metal floor and up through his boots. The translation device on her wrist rendered her words in clear, flat English. "At last, the blind galaxy sends one who sees." She crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and placed one of her 4 hands on his shoulder. Her grip was firm and warm, and carried the weight of something Marcus could not yet understand. Behind him, Captain Sato looked like she was about to collapse. Marcus stood very still with an alien queen's hand on his shoulder, and 6 kneeling soldiers surrounding him, and the distinct feeling that he had just done something enormous, without having the faintest idea what it was. "So," he said quietly to no one in particular, "this is going great."